Hillsdale College. Constitution 101, the meaning of history and the Constitution. Make sure you guys go to hillsdale.edu/Tim to enroll for free. Have you guys ever heard someone say, either in a clip or on TV, or just someone you know, something like, quote, capitalism is evil? How do you respond? And when did capitalism become so controversial? Hillsdale College is offering more than 40 free online courses. That's right, free. Learn about the United States Constitution, the stories in the book of Genesis, the rise and fall of the Roman Republic, or the history of the ancient Christian church with Hillsdale College free online courses. Hillsdale recently launched a new course, Understanding Capitalism, that you should definitely check out. In 7 lectures, you'll learn about the role of profit and loss, how human nature plays a role in our economic system, why capitalism depends on private property rights, the rule of law, and above all, freedom, and why capitalism is ultimately a system that encourages morality rather than undermines it. Go right now to hillsdale.edu/Tim to enroll in this course, Understanding Capitalism. There's no cost, and it's easy to get started. Once again, that's hillsdale.edu/Tim. Look, it's free. That's amazing. From Politico, Trump announces Israel-Iran ceasefire. The announcement comes after the U.S. waded into the 12-day conflict over the weekend. They say Trump, in a post on Truth Social, said the ceasefire will take effect just after midnight on the east coast of the United States, with the war slated to officially end 12 hours later. Quote, "This is a war that could have gone on for years and destroyed the entire Middle East, but it didn't and never will." Neither Israel nor Iran immediately confirmed Trump's announcement that they had agreed to a ceasefire. Both countries have been indirectly fighting since the October 7th attacks against Israel by Tehran-backed Palestinian militant groups, Hamas, and they have traded direct fire intermittently since 2024. But after Israel attacked Iranian nuclear facilities earlier this month, the two longtime Middle East adversaries have launched volleys of drones and missiles against each other. Now, it is being confirmed by Reuters that a senior official said that they have agreed to a ceasefire. We have this from Trey Yingst of Fox News. Diplomat briefed on the ceasefire talks to Fox News, saying President Trump spoke with Qatar's emir and informed him the U.S. got Israel to agree to a ceasefire with Iran. The president asked Qatar to help persuade Iran to do the same. Following that, Vice President Vance coordinated with Qatar's prime minister on the details. This effort proved successful, and following discussions with the Qatari PM, the Iranians agreed. The deal was coordinated at the highest level by the president and vice president and the Qatari emir and prime minister directly. Despite having been attacked just hours earlier, the Qataris set aside their grievances and prioritized regional security to get the deal done. So just before this announcement, actually a couple hours before, it was videos emerged of Iran launching ballistic missiles at Qatar, targeting the U.S. base. Should this prove to hold? I just got to say, Trump, he's hit a grand slam with this one. If the war officially ends, he can say that it's a war powers resolution. He's allowed to take military action. No further military action is needed. We have a ceasefire. If within the next 12 hours the fighting has stopped, Trump's got a tremendous historic victory.
Libertarians are going to be most affected, I think. They're going to be very, very upset that this happened and that, the sky didn't fall. It didn't expand into a wider war. It was just a strike. And Iran was like, well, we're not really in a position to do anything about this, are we? And took the actual, self-preservation route.
Why are they mad? Because they wanted to see this disintegrate?
Well, because they were all predicting that there was going to be a massive, upheaval in the Middle East. It'll turn into a broader war. It'll turn into World War III, blah, blah, blah. But you look around and it speaks to actually the realistic conditions of the international rivals the U.S. has. Russia doesn't have the ability to take on the U.S. They can't take on the Ukraine, right? Like they can't handle Ukraine. They're not going to be able to take on the U.S. So they're not going to really step in to help Iran. Same thing with China. China has a significant incentive to keep the status quo, particularly in the Strait of Hormuz, because they get half their oil or whatever. They get tons of business there. Barrels, so China was just like, no, you're not shutting down the Strait of Hormuz. They had no friends at all, and no one was there to support them. So I think that speaks to this situation.
Stoked for peace.
Yeah.
There's peace.
Yeah.
I do leave it to Trump to start already branding a war. Like he's already
12
naming
days
it.
war, yeah.
There's a lot in this message.
It wasn't a war, and a ceasefire doesn't mean a peace agreement. Sometimes when you're in a war, you'll call a ceasefire for a short period, and then you'll go back to fighting. So it doesn't mean, but there never was a war to call a peace agreement for anyway. They fired, 13 or 14 missiles into Qatar, and all but one of them were shot down. One of the missiles was errant, so they just let it go.
Yeah, they're like, where's it going?
I personally don't trust anything coming out of this administration at the moment. They just sneak attacked Iran. I imagine they're going to do it again. But like you said, their faces on the ground. They're being stomped on. Their bones are breaking. They have no choice but to.
How many people live in Iran, Ian?
What's that?
How many people live in
I
Iran?
believe there's 92 million, but I haven't done the research.
I
haven't done the research.
I respect what you are saying, Ian. The Trump administration, this is where I'm cautious. They have made a lot of comments about negotiating peace, negotiating in good faith, while they were actually orchestrating a sneak attack on Iran. Now, if it weren't for the subsequent reporting from numerous individuals involved that there was a ceasefire, initially I was skeptical. It's like, I don't believe it. Trump announces they got a ceasefire, and then if Iran keeps attacking, it's Iran that becomes the aggressor. However, it does look like Trump is trying to avoid escalation in the region and just wanted to take out as much of their nuclear enrichment as possible. I don't know that they did. Like, if you want to argue efficacy, there's a lot of people saying 900 pounds of uranium is missing. What did they actually do? It's like, well, they did what they could in terms of that agenda item. The argument here is that Trump has, under the War Powers Act, it's an old bill, if there's an imminent threat, he can order a military strike. Within 60 days, he must stop and ask Congress for approval to continue. If this does end, Trump, he did it. I will say this to everybody because they were like, Tim, you were saying that it was going to escalate. I have no problem being wrong. I'm not going to sit here and be like, here's why Trump is actually going to screw up. No, I'm stoked. Holy crap, I'd love to be wrong. I was worried AF that this was going to escalate. If Trump really did just pull it off, I apologize for doubting the man.
I know that parents, mothers in particular, are thrilled that Iran will not have nuclear weapons. So, moms, for the most part, I would say probably don't understand Middle East policy and what's going on over there, but they have concerns as parents. And one of those things is a nuclear Iran. That's a very big possibility. And so I didn't hear a lot of pushback from the mom community when we went in and took out those nuclear facilities.
What concerns me, though, is the idea here, the Lend-Lease program. The Americans were giving the British weapons before World War II, but they couldn't sell them because they would have been violating, some shit. So they were
Wasn't the Lend-Lease with the Soviets?
The Lend-Lease was a program between the Americans and the British where the Americans were giving it to a lot of people, but the British particularly, they're giving them weapons. And then they were like, you just pay us back later. So someone could give the Iranians a nuclear weapon and be like, just pay us later. Like, they don't have to make it. They can get one. They can receive one also. So we need to strengthen our diplomatic ties with the Chinese, the Russians, and the Indians right now, particularly because they don't want a nuclear Iran. Nobody wants it. I don't think, except for these mullahs.
If nobody wants a nuclear Iran, who's going to give them the nuclear bomb?
I know. Maybe because Putin won't always be in power, and if some crazy guy gets it after Putin,
old president of Russia, I think, said he was going to help them, and that happened.
Or that other countries were rushing in.
Yeah.
North Korea, of course, but he's also on good terms with Trump. So I think that I want. I was going to say regime change. How can I say this smoothly? I don't like theocracy. I find theocracy even more dangerous than monarchy.
I want regime change.
I do too.
In Iran. I just don't want to be involved in whatever that means.
And I want it to be peaceful. I would love for it to be like they set it down, another organization picks it up, if possible. I don't know if that's, I think that's what the Israelis are planning to do anyway, make it happen. It looks like that's what they're about to do. And they're just install some sort of targeted assassinations on Iranian
That would mean
leaders.
the war's not over.
Where has there ever been a peaceful regime change except in a democratically elected
Canada.
country?
In 79,
an election in a somewhat democratic country, but in a place like Iran.
In Iran in 79, it was relatively peaceful. It only lasted about 6 months, the revolution, maybe 4 months on 6 months.
Didn't a tyrant take over? Isn't that what got us into this situation?
But it wasn't really bloody. The king at the time didn't fight back, and everyone was like, why aren't you stopping the rebellion? And he was just like sitting in his castle not fighting it, and so they deposed him, and it was relatively peaceful as revolutions for a country that size, and it could happen again.
And what I think you're saying is that they can change, but I don't want to be involved in it, like all the coups we've done around whether it's Guatemala or Iran again, I don't want that to happen. They can do whatever they want.
The thing is, the Shah's son, who's in America right now, is the most likely candidate to be installed as the king of Iran, and we would definitely, because he's in America, we would somehow we'd be involved with putting them up in the British.
The issue with regime change nowadays compared to even 20 or 30 years ago is the internet and the speed of communications. So a couple hundred years ago, you wanted regime change, you literally need only stand in a building. You'd be standing in the building, sitting on the throne, being like, we're in charge now. And if the king was in exile, then people didn't listen. So you take a look at even 100 years ago, how these revolutions took place, and it was just like, we've stormed the building and 1,000 people surrounded it, and now the entire country of millions of people has a new form of government. These days, there's digital communications.
And you saw that in France in World War II, because the French, Paris was taken over. 500 years ago, entire country of France would have served the Germans, but half of France split off because Charles de Gaulle went into exile in England and was able to kind of lead this resistance via telephone. And now we've got the internet.
Yeah. So if, say, a group of people were to like storm the Capitol, like during the counting of the electoral vote, and they stood in that building, literally nothing would happen. The president doesn't change. Nobody loses or gains control. Occupying the building and controlling the force there changes nothing.
That's why I always wondered about the term insurrection. It never really made sense to me on what happened that day.
High stakes king of the hill. That's all it was.
That's why insurrection is the wrong term for what happened on January 6th. I would say insurrection in Portland, as it is applied legally, in that local laws are not being followed, that is a legal insurrection for which the president can invoke the Insurrection Act and call in the National Guard to go shut down those riots.
Yeah,
So
the police led the J6ers in. Like,
Right.
there's all that video of them actually giving them a nice tour. Unlike in Portland and other places where they took over streets and set up camp, killed innocent people.
Some entrances had a different dynamic, right?
Those people were Antifa and red hats.
I want to say for the record, since there's 100 million people listening or whatever it is, I do want regime change in Iran in a peaceful manner in some sort. And I'm very happy with this announcement of a ceasefire. Although I said I don't believe anything coming out of their mouths, I'm very happy to hear it regardless. I think it's a very good diplomatic move. I know that Putin at first was like, I think we're going to help Iran. We might help them get a nuke. At least this is what I was reading these reports. And then later he's like, actually, we're just going to help them.
It wasn't
diplomatic.
Putin.
It wasn't Putin.
Medvedev.
Oh yeah, it was Medvedev. And then they just kind of walked it back, and they're like, we're gonna help diplomatically. They just wanted to solve the problem. They don't want to blow stuff up.
And bringing it back to moms real quick, like, I don't really care all that much about the nukes, honestly. I care more about sending our children to war, and like that's the possibility of this when it's possibly escalating, and it still could, and sending kids to war.
Yeah, look,
very,
I have
very upsetting.
two sons, 24 and 17, so they're
Yeah.
both ideal candidates.
Prime
if-
fighting age.
Yeah, if there was some kind of draft, but I still personally, I
Yeah.
can't speak for my, all 130,000 Moms for Liberty members at the moment, but personally, I still support what happened. That photo, it's not up right now, but the photo of President Trump walking out with Marco Rubio behind him, and what I'm talking about was really, well, that's part of it, but you see Pete Hegseth even behind that. You see all 4 or 5 of them standing there. I kept going back to that photo and just looking at these men that I feel like we've gotten to know over the last few years. These are good men that I know of. I've met their spouses. I feel like I have some familiarity with them. And to see the looks on their faces, I mean, they knew what the decisions they were making. They knew there was some risk, even if there was calculated and risk, and they felt like it was in the right direction. And I just am, I'm thankful for them. I'm thankful that they are making the hard choices and leading the way.
Thanks for checking out this clip from Timcast IRL. Make sure to watch the show live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. Subscribe to this channel, and we will see you all there.